Welcome to this episode of Rattling the Bars. We have been watching the crises in the prison system with COVID-19 pandemic spreading throughout the prison system. One of the silent crises that we have not been watching in the prison system is the environmental conditions in which prisoners live under. So joining me today is Kempis Songster. He spent 30 years in prison fighting for environmental justice. Also joining me is Professor David N. Pellow. He's at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Joining me also is Professor Salvatore Engel-Di Mauro from New York State University. Thank you for joining me.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Okay. All right. Same here. David, can you give us an overview of what's the environmental conditions like throughout the nation's prison system? And y'all can follow up if he leave anything out.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Conway. It's really wonderful to meet you and to be a part of this conversation with these esteemed guests. What we've seen on the other side of the prison and jail walls in residential communities, of course, for many years, is people who are fighting for clean air, clean water, clean land in the face of environmental racism, environmental injustice, where companies, government agencies, and other institutions have been polluting our environment with disproportionate force and violence. And this, of course, has given rise to the environmental justice movement, a movement that says that we can't have a sustainable environment if we don't also have racial justice, right? So in terms of in the carceral systems, in jails and detention centers and prisons, we're seeing similar challenges. We're seeing contaminated water that folks are being forced to drink, full of lead, copper, and manganese. We're seeing air being contaminated, really poor ventilation systems. We're seeing the medical system being inadequate. We're seeing inadequate food and nutrition. And in many cases, we are seeing jails and prisons that have been built smack dab right next to or even on top of federally designated toxic Superfund sites, hazardous waste sites, in flood zones, these kinds of things. So from top to bottom, from A to Z, we are really seeing a whole host of environmental threats that folks in jails and prisons and detention centers are facing. And this is also leading, of course, to, in my view, a really exciting front in the environmental justice movement's development, where we're seeing some of the most inspiring leaders and advocates for environmental justice emerging from the space of prisons and jails.
Okay. Gandhi, could you give us some insight from looking inside? What was it like? You spent 30 years struggling, organizing around the environmental conditions. Why?
Yeah, I mean, it's you're right. 30 years from the age of 15 in 1987 to when I was released on December 28th, 2017, at the age of 45, pursuant to the Miller versus Alabama ruling. And in every prison I was in, we had an issue with the toxicity of the water, but it really it intensified when I got to Greater Ford, where I spent the last 14 or so of my time behind the walls. And Greater Ford, it had the water was so bad it had gotten the attention of, a renowned environmentalist in the country, Erin Brockovich. She actually came to Montgomery County, where Greater Ford Prison is, back in, I think it was 2015, because it had gotten out that there were heavy concentrations of benzene, chromium-6, and trichloroethylene in the water at Greater Ford Prison. Trichloroethylene, or TCE for short, metal companies in Montgomery County was using this chemical as a metal degreaser. And what they would do after they finished using it, they would dump it on the ground. The idea was for it to evaporate and go into the air, which a lot of it did, but then a lot of it also went into the ground and polluted the water tables, polluted 60 wells in Pottstown and Collegeville. Collegeville is where Greater Fort is, and that's been the drinking water that we've been confined to and restricted to for decades at Greater Fort. And everybody knows, trichloroethylene is a carcinogen, and it causes leukemia, liver cancer, neurosis, and all kind of different issues. From the year of 1991 till I left Greater Fort Prison in 2017, over 600 people had died there, from all kind of illnesses, different cancers, and not just, geriatric illnesses. We had people, as young as 27 years old developing cancers at Greater Fort Prison. And so, that I was up close and personal with this. I know the effects of, I know the struggles of not being able to drink water out of the water tap and having to spend money to buy water, bottled water, through the so-called inmate concessions programs that they had. And we would spend $20 for a case of water that would cost $3.99 on the streets. And so I know the unsustainability of living behind the walls, and you can't even drink water or eat food. You know what I'm saying? That was good for you. And so I became like environmentally conscious, conscious of the toxicity of prison life quite early and by force. You know what I'm saying? And I remember working with brothers like Mike Africa from the Move 9, and other political prisoners, you know what I'm saying, fighting against this issue. Matter of fact, some agents from the Environmental Protection Agency came in because of some noise that Mike Africa's son, Mike Jr., and Pam Africa had made about the water situation at Greater Fort, walked into the prison, walked up to Mike Africa's cell and did a fake mock test of the water and said that the water was cool and stuff like that. But I mean, like, we were like up close and personal in this battle for our lives behind the walls. And, and this eventually grew into me learning more about the different levels and degrees of toxicity of the prison industrial complex, not just the water.
Syed, the larger community is outside these walls. And of course, it's been pointed out that there are environmental injustices outside in the larger community. But why should the larger community care if they poison prisoners and shorten our life expectancy and just pretty much take us off the board so that the state don't have to house us? Why should the larger community care about that?
That's a fantastic question, and I'm sure Professor Pellow would be even better placed than me to answer that question. But very briefly, there are at least two reasons why people should care. One is that prisons are themselves sources of pollution, despite what the Department of Justice recently have tried to pretend away as the possibility of greening prisons. They are not sustainable, ecologically speaking. And two, we're dealing with more than 2 million people affected, potentially, and that is, if anything, an incredible burden on the healthcare system in this country, which is already malfunctioning, which is already structured to malfunction. So those two reasons alone should concern the public at large. But I would defer to Dr. Pellow to elaborate even further, and certainly to Ghani, who has been inside and outside and would know even better how important it is for the outside to understand this as a problem.
Okay, David, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that has been said. I would go back to decades ago when Brother Mumia Abu Jamal wrote a powerful essay where he talked about the problem of water contamination in prisons in the United States as being very, very widespread, and how in many cases the same municipal water utility districts that are delivering that water, that contaminated water, to people on the inside, that's the same water in some cases, in many cases, that's going to everybody else. And so he made this distinction between the caged people and the not yet caged people. So he said, we're all in this together in some respect, because we are all generally drinking the same water. And as was said earlier, if you don't care about folks on the inside and you just care about the environment, then you should care about the fact that prisons are contributing a very, very significant amount to greenhouse gas emissions. There's a recent article called Locked into Emissions that shows that mass incarceration contributes significantly to global greenhouse gas emissions. So we're facing climate change threats, wildfires, droughts, agricultural systems collapse, all sorts of things in our communities around the world, around the United States. Prisons are contributing to that directly. But to go again back to Brother Mumia, his statement about the caged versus the not yet caged, I think we would all agree that in any society where we're locking folks up, torturing folks, putting people in cages and behind bars, no one is truly free. And so we are all threatened by this system that is perpetrating global environmental threats and perpetrating threats against human rights and basic freedoms. And so we should be concerned for all of those reasons.
Gandhi, what kind of tools did you have to work with to fight that battle inside the prison, and what tools do prisoners have today? Because I know they've tightened up the prison system completely to fight, to push back against brown water. Everybody knows that this water is going to destroy your kidneys, and yet you're stuck in there. Like you say, you either got to buy water or risk your health. What kind of tools are there to fight against this stuff for prisoners?
Yeah, unfortunately, the tools aren't many. Let's be clear about that on the inside. But on the outside, our support system, that's what we rely on, being able to also smuggle samples of water out to the streets to be tested. You know what I'm saying? That was something that we did, at great risk, to ourselves on the inside, and at great risk to our support on the outside. But when I talk about support, I'm talking about like the Abolitionist Law Center, who's been one of the strongest allies, in this fight against prison toxicity. SCI Fayette, which is a prison in the western part of Pennsylvania, for instance. Abolitionist Law Center did a report about a lawsuit that we filed against that prison to try to get that prison shut down. Because as you know, SCI Fayette was built on a toxic ash dump. This was a piece of land that was owned by Matt Canistrell Contracting. And, Matt Canistrell Contracting, what they did was, they would wash and prepare coal on this land. And after the coal was cleaned, as if there could ever be anything such as clean coal, the coal was sent to different areas, and a lot of it was dumped on that area itself. And in 1996, Matt Canistrell Contracting had purchased that area, and they started using it as a dump site. And after amassing about 40 million tons of coal slurry ponds, thousands of yards of toxic ash, or what they call flying ash, that would fly around and land on the people's houses that lived around the prison, right? And this goes to your question too about, how it affects other people. It was because the people in the surrounding communities had higher rates of cancers than other parts of the state. But anyway, we discovered, because of the outbreak of gastrointestinal issues and rashes and tumors and cysts and cancers among the incarcerated population in that prison, Abolitionist Law Center took that case and are still fighting that case. And the matter of fact, you could go online and read the report by the Abolitionist Law Center about SCI Fayette called No Escape. And so our tools for fighting against prison toxicity and for our health, and quite frankly for the health of people in the surrounding communities, is the law, outside support, and our ability to just tell the narrative, you know what I'm saying, about what's going on. And probably the most unconscionable tool and the most unlikely tool is dead bodies. You know what I'm saying? Dead bodies was how we told the story about what was going on behind the walls and the effects of prison toxicity.
David, you want to kind of take a stab at the tools outside? One of the things that I was looking at this prison in California. They were building a prison for women in California, and they were building it in a valley that had some kind of deer that their droppings were toxic and they were causing cancer. And I think they blocked that prison. But it seemed to me that this move against toxic prisons have to be started way, way up front from the time that paperwork starts gathering about plans to build something. Talk to me about that.
Sure, I'm happy to say a little bit about that and weigh in on that part of the conversation. I think we could go back to the 1990s when the Kern Valley State Prison was being proposed, and this was seen as a threat to the local environment, to a variety of non-human animals. It was also going to be seen as a threat to human beings who would be caged in this unhealthy environment, where valley fever, for example, would be something that people could experience, where later on we found out arsenic laced water turned out to be a problem. And this was an amazing movement of folks like the Critical Resistance, Mothers of East Los Angeles came together to fight this prison, and were ultimately not successful at stopping the prison from being built. But they were right from the very beginning that all of those environmental justice and environmental health issues were going to come to the fore, and they certainly did. And so the battle isn't over, because now we have this information and it's been proven correct from the very beginning. We can continue to use that as a force to shut down that prison. A successful example where this did work was with the Letcher County, Kentucky prison, which would have been the most expensive federal penitentiary ever built in the United States, in Letcher County, Kentucky. And folks organized, at least 21 currently incarcerated persons worked together as part of a coalition with folks on the ground in Kentucky and around the country to oppose that prison on the grounds that it was going to harm endangered species, it was going to harm people, and it was going to harm the local environment. It was going to be placed on top of what used to be a mountain that had been blown up to get access to coal through mountaintop mining removal, which just lays waste to the local environment, creates all kinds of health problems for the workers and for the nearby communities. And so these folks succeeded at getting the Federal Bureau of Prisons to back down and withdraw that proposal in the summer of 2019, precisely because they made the argument and succeeded at making the argument that the prison did not address all of those impacts in the environmental impact report. So for me, that was a major success for prisoner rights, for human rights, and for environmental justice. And so that was something that was started, as you were saying, from the very beginning at the time of this proposal. So that was, for me, it was an important, successful case study.
Gandhi, you said you wanted to follow up on the question I asked David. So do you have a follow up, and then I'll get back to Syed about what people can be doing? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, that another aspect of the prison industrial complex that doesn't get enough attention is prison site selection. I don't know if David said this because I couldn't hear him, but I'm talking about what the criteria is for choosing the site for the construction of a prison. All right, and SCI Fayette, like I mentioned, is a case in point in the discussion about prison site selection. Areas are selected that are dirt cheap because they're already dead land bases, destroyed by previous industries for coal, steel, waste dumping, or whatever. And it is all now useless real estate. And then they build prisons on top of them because of the cheapness. The cheapness of that land is appealing to the prison industrialists. Then they bring hundreds of thousands of people from faraway places, from wherever we live at in the country, mostly from poor communities and communities of color, to be confined to these sites in these toxic death chambers. Right. And so my thing is, address the issue of prison site selection. When they're about to build a prison somewhere, You know what I'm saying? We should be front and center, doing our investigation and our research on that land, what industries was on that land prior to the building of this prison, and raise the issue of environmental justice. As there is an intersection between mass incarceration and environmental environmental justice and environmental racism, because predominantly the people that are put in this situation is people of color, and we need to highlight that whenever they choose a site to build a prison.
Saeed, what do you think outside people should be doing about this? Because it seems to me that way before prisoners are put in those prisons, as I was saying to David, it's got to be checked there. What do you think outside people should be doing?
I'll make this as brief as possible. I mean, there are many avenues. One is, for example, the organizations that Professor Pellow and Brother Gundy mentioned, to support them in their work, environmental justice organizations, and also pushing environmental justice organizations as well as the EPA and create protest movement to make sure that these problems are tackled that have already been defined earlier. There is a move by the Department of Justice that I alluded to earlier to greenwash the prison industrial complex. That needs to be resisted by public sensitization campaigns. What Brother Gunny just stated is extremely important, because there is an attempt as well, because of the land value system in this kind of capitalist framework, where you have the cheapest land is where you'll put the warehouse population in, to the detriment of their health and all their families' well-being. So those are some of the avenues. The Abolitionist Law Center, for example, being supported financially so they can carry out their investigations. But also, in particular, that this hits me closer to home, because in the geosciences, there's very little movement. There's very little sensitivity to this. And in the scientific world, I think that's where needs also to be some pressure, where people are going to become more active. There's a little bit of movement towards in that direction. And Brother Ghani mentioned, smuggling water outside. We shouldn't have to smuggle anything outside of prisons. We should have full access to prisons. That's the other thing that needs to be pushed for in the public discourse, and to get as many scientists involved as possible to push for this as well, to legitimate this process further, because they have the lab availability, the funding possibilities. All of that needs to be galvanized as well. I'm touching on a few things here, and I hope that people will think other aspects as well. I'm sure they will, even better than I could. And but thank you so much for that incredibly important question.
Okay, and thank you for joining me. This has been informative for me also. We're going to probably revisit this. Thank you.